Hello, everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to the very first annual Security Weekly Unlocked conference. Believe it or not, celebrating 15 years of Security Weekly. I'm Sumedh Thakar, President and Chief Product Officer of Qualys. For those of you who may not know about Qualys, we are a leading provider of cybersecurity solutions that cover your entire hybrid infrastructure, all the way from on-prem assets, cloud containers, mobile devices, as well as SaaS environments. And we do that with a very unique approach, with a single platform, single agent approach, providing all of the visibility that today's enterprises need to be able to satisfy all of their needs from an IT visibility, security, as well as compliance, all through a single platform. And we are very excited to be a diamond sponsor of this very unique conference. Fantastic agenda. If you want to take a look at it, really providing visibility for the DevOps, the DevSecOps guys, but also topics that are very pertinent to offensive security, defensive security, very much mirroring the overall podcast series where Paul and team have done such a great job. I've had a pleasure of being on these podcasts multiple times, and Paul really keeps it real. He and the team, they ask a lot of very good questions that are really from the perspective of those hands-on keyboard folks who are sitting behind the screen and operationalizing security and getting that perspective to them. And so the conference is filled with very interesting talks, and this is very unique, which is something that I'm looking forward to, and hopefully you will enjoy as well. And of course, as we all know, Paul has done a great job on this one, and it is my pleasure now to introduce you to Paul Asadorian, who is the founder of Security Weekly, and he is the only podcaster that I know who actually spins up his own containers and breaks them down for fun. And at the same time, while smoking a cigar, drinking a dirty martini, and a bourbon at the same time. So my pleasure introducing you to the biggest Star Wars nerd that I know, Paul Asadoorian.
Welcome everyone to Security Weekly Unlocked, our first virtual event done in collaboration with the Cyber Risk Alliance. Hopefully everyone is getting settled into the platform and ready to hear some awesome talks and demos from our sponsors. Very excited about today, of course. This is being pre-recorded, so if you need any information on the day, December 10th, 2020, for the Security Weekly Unlocked event, I do encourage everyone to go to the Discord server. There are several chat rooms set up there for attendees of Security Weekly Unlocked. I'm, of course, Paul Asadorian. I am the Chief Innovation Officer at the Cyber Risk Alliance, as well as the founder of Security Weekly. We are still, of course, doing all things Security Weekly just underneath the Cyber Risk Alliance umbrella. And it was awesome to put this event on. The team worked very, very hard to get this event pulled off. So I do thank everyone on the team collectively that worked hard to put together this event for your enjoyment today. Let's see, if you need to refer to the agenda, again, Discord is a great resource for you, as well as securityweekly.com/unlocked. The agenda is there. And you can review that at any time and choose which tracks and talks you would like to attend throughout the day. After the event, of course, make sure you stay tuned for Paul's Security Weekly being recorded and streamed live, of course, at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. We've got 3 fantastic segments for you after the event, so make sure you stay tuned for that. In today's presentation, I just want to run through some of the history of Security Weekly, since this is also celebrating on this day, December 10th, 2020, celebrating the 15-year anniversary of Security Weekly, as well as kicking off our inaugural edition of Security Weekly Unlocked. And it took me well over 15 times to say inaugural correctly. I got it now, which is awesome. So I'm going to run through a little bit of history of Security Weekly, talk about past and hopefully some things in the future as well, and then cover some things related, of course, to the Unlocked event today and some insights into the various tracks and ways to get more information. Again, Discord is the best place for that. So Security Weekly is 15 years, which means I'm really old. Putting together and looking at some of the pictures from 15 years ago, I was like, wow, I was a lot skinnier and stuff back then, which is kind of funny. That is actually a picture from episode 1 of what was then actually called a different name. Of course, it was called Paul.com's Security Weekly. Now today, Paul's Security Weekly, which is the flagship show for the network, as it was the first podcast created roughly October 27th, 2005. And I say roughly because that is the day that I released the podcast. And as I was new to podcast editing, it took me a really long time to get that one edited and out the door. So it's probably a couple of weeks prior to that date that we recorded episode 1 of Security Weekly in Los Angeles, California at a SANS training event, Larry, myself, and several others. And you'll see some pictures of those in the montage and in other slides. I tried to incorporate some of the history of Security Weekly in today's presentation. So yes, that was in fact 15 years ago, and it's great to still be doing it today. And some may wonder how it started, which is kind of a funny story, actually. So one day I was like, hey, Larry, you want to do a podcast with me? Because that sounds really cool. Like, I think we should do a podcast. And Larry was like, what? A podcast? What are you talking about? And I was like, well, there's free beer. And then Larry was like, oh, well, I'm in. There was no question after that. There was free beer involved. And while we do drink beer, wine, and cocktails on the show today, especially our Thursday night Paul's Security Weekly, that was pretty much how it started. I wanted to do a podcast. I wanted to share information with the security community, give back to the security community. Podcasting was a relatively new thing back in 2005. And I mean, as you'll see, like, there really wasn't much of a plan other than I was like, Larry, let's do a podcast, sit around, drink beer, and talk about security. And we still do that today, of course. And then there was other questions that came about, such as, well, we're going to do a podcast. We established that there's going to be beer. Those were the important things and still are today. However, we were like, what are we going to call it? And I was like, well, I have this nickname called Paul.com. We should call it Paul.com, the Security Weekly. And we're like, okay, sure, that's fine. That was literally how much thought we might have put into naming it, which of course did come back to bite us, trademark lawsuit, which we presented on at Source Boston 1 year, just for a little bit of the background there, and ended up changing the name to just Security Weekly, changing the name of the show, of course, to Paul's Security Weekly, and then adding on several other shows, which I'll talk about coming up. Some of the other questions were, hey, so where are we going to record this? And it's interesting because in the very beginning, we would find a different location each time. And logistically, that proved to be a complete nightmare. While it was fun, it was a complete nightmare logistically. So I said, well, we should just use my basement. And that's where we recorded the podcast. That's actually my newer basement in my newer house. The original basement was in my older house. I couldn't find any pictures. We may have some. I couldn't find any of the original. There was a bar in my basement in my first house that we started the podcast. This is the pool table in my second house, which I still live in today. There is no pool table anymore, however. But we converted the pool table into basically a podcast studio for us to record. And then we said, well, how are we going to tell people about it? Because we knew this podcast and people should probably download it. And it's interesting, in the early days, we went to a lot of hacker events and promoted the podcast, in addition to also going to SANS events and throwing around inflatable pigs and in different shenanigans and hack naked t-shirts to gain some. It was really very much like guerrilla style marketing to get us off the ground, which surprisingly worked really well, including throwing around an inflatable pig at a SANS event, which didn't necessarily, it was funny, but maybe didn't go over all that well. In any case, we were like, well, what are we going to talk about? Sorry, we have this show, we got a place to record it, we've got a name, we've even got ways to promote it. What are we going to talk about on each episode? And basically our plan was, and sometimes still is today, that we're just going to sit around and drink beer and talk about whatever comes to mind about security. And that's really, it was the strategy, and sometimes carries forth today into the shows where, especially in the news stories, we're like, hey, we're just going to sit around and have some drinks and talk about security, which is what I love. And I love that we still do that today and hold that near and dear to our hearts. Alrighty. Our Security Weekly core values, as I mentioned earlier, we were acquired by the Cyber Risk Alliance. Previous to that, we had to do grown-up things like change our name and set up all the different websites and have employees and maintain equipment and all that stuff. And through all of that, we held true to our core values. First and foremost is the text that you hear, spoken text in the beginning of every show, which is for security professionals by security professionals. And that is something, of course, today that we hold very true and make sure that all of us are still practicing, doing security in some capacity, whether that's research, whether that's helping out a friend, whether that's our home networks, whether that's consulting with enterprises, doing penetration testing, compliance, consulting, whatever the case may be. We still maintain the persona or the aspect that we are actually practicing security professionals. And that comes through. It's the greatest compliment when we're speaking with one of our potential sponsors or someone who's created a company in cybersecurity, and we ask them questions and they give us that initial feedback of, wow, it sounds like you folks actually do this stuff. And that's refreshing, because we like to talk to people that actually have done this stuff and are doing this stuff today. And I think that helps get the message across, both from our sponsors and to our audience, who are largely out there, practicing security professionals today as well. The hacker spirit definitely guides our culture, and you see that directly in the shows and the way that we approach the topics and in various aspects of our shows, as well as all of the other kind of little things, the way we do production, the way we build the sets. There's a lot of homage to hacker culture. There's the way we approach all of the problems and challenges that we have in getting all the shows produced. It's very much in the hacker spirit. All of the conversations that we have on the show are done with that hacker spirit. Our research and prep for the show, right, is done in that hacker spirit. And, that guides us. And we've got one of our segments that we did last year and are doing again this year. So talk about hacker culture. I think this year it's titled Hacking Matters. To really keep that hacker spirit alive, I think is very important. We also support the security community as our number one mission. We like to give our shows away for free and support the security community. And that's a two-way street. We bring on members of the security community to our shows. We also produce our show in all of our shows to support the security community. We want to hear from you. We want to know what's relevant. What are your challenges? What do you want to learn about? And provide you with the latest news, the latest techniques, do technical segments, and support the community in any way we can. And we wouldn't be able to do that, of course, without our listeners, without all of the hosts across all of our shows, without our fabulous staff, our guests, advisors, sponsors, our family members that put up with us sometimes off hours, such as Thursday nights, coming here and doing a show, traveling to events, and their support, and all of everyone's support makes that all possible. And again, thank you to everyone for putting this event together, as it was an enormous amount of work, and I hope our audience appreciates all of the content that we have in store for you today. Looking at Security Weekly today, it's kind of interesting, as it literally was a podcast that was created by a few folks that sat around, drank beer in a basement, and talked about security. And we fast forward to today, and we're over 20 million downloads by last count. And again, that's just one kind of random statistic that I pulled, and doesn't capture all of our downloads, but most of them in that 20 million number across the past 15 years. We've also won 8 awards at the Security Bloggers Meetup at RSA in various categories for security podcasts. Today, we have 7 active shows on the network. Stay tuned in 2021. I don't want to give too much away, but we're talking about new initiatives in addition to perhaps rebooting some shows in 2021 as well. So that's definitely in the works. And today we don't actually podcast and record video in my basement any longer. We have 4 sets across 2 studios, and today we produce roughly 12 hours of content, sometimes more, every single week here in G Unit Studios, as well as A Unit Studios downstairs as well as all of the shows incorporate remote hosts today, as well as an in-studio presence. And again, just speak of the timeline, September 2020 was the official announcement of Cyber Risk Alliance acquiring the Security Weekly podcast, along with a fabulous number of other brands. So being in that family has been spectacular and allowed us to continue to grow, of course, and take on new initiatives, such as the event happening today. We have a far more advanced AV setup than we did in the past. And this is kind of interesting as well. One of my projects is mapping out our hardware and our processes and our software for producing shows. And when I started thinking about what the equipment looked like 15 years ago and the progressions that we've made, and we're always improving on that, it's just staggering. Going back to the days and thinking about how we had one small little mixer with some headphones and microphones to the fairly elaborate setup that we're working on upgrading and building today. I think we're always upgrading our setup. We're always trying to improve upon how we do production. Production today incorporates something like 30 plus monitors, over a dozen systems, multiple video switchers, different kinds of converters, multiple cameras, microphones here in the studio with cough buttons and headphone gain adjustments and video capture cards. It's just amazing the amount of things that go into our setup today, and just a diagram kind of depicting some of the moving parts in our setups today. And it's amazing to me to see the advancement of that, and very fun to keep advancing the technology moving forward. We also have a lot better sets than we did in the past. And again, embodying that hacker spirit, our sets today are very much pulling things from the dumpster and utilizing things we have and being creative and really hacking together our set to get it to look nice. And, previously those may remember when we first started really cranking out video was largely in my office, in my house with some soundproof foam and some cabinets. It wasn't necessarily the best set. You can see there's a binky in the background in that episode, which is kind of interesting. It was actually when I had my first son, just around that time. So there's binkies laying around. We may have put that on the set actually on purpose as a prop. And you can see, of course, paper towels and empty beer bottles and stuff in the background. It wasn't the best environment to be recording video, but I always had this notion and this vision that we would do video, and we would always do video, and we would continue to get better at it. And we have, which is exciting when you look at our sets today. Super happy with the look, the feel, and the technology that goes behind our sets today that allow us to record at this level of production quality for our audience. Of course, for Security Weekly, if you want to be more engaged with Security Weekly and learn about all of the different things, I should probably go back and talk about the shows just briefly. So when I say I'd like all of our audience to subscribe to all of our shows, those are Application Security Weekly. So we do host an entire show just on application security, and that's with Mike Shima and John Kinsella. Adrian Sanabria and Matt Alderman also participate in that show. I won't get all the hosts right. I'll manage to mess it up, and I'll apologize in advance for that. Of course, we have Business Security Weekly, which is our show for the C-levels and CISOs specifically. Myself, Matt Alderman, and Jason Albuquerque on that show. We have a Security and Compliance Weekly show, which bridges the gap between security and compliance with Jeff Mann, Scott Lyons, and Josh Marpet, as well as some other faces that will continue to make appearances on that show. Security Weekly News, I've handed off the reins to Dr. Doug White. That's now a bi-weekly show. We do a wrap-up show as well as cover the news weekly in a short format, and that also features Jason Wood, typically digging into one particular article or topic in a short format show. Of course, there's Enterprise Security Weekly, when we talk about all of the different enterprise security solutions, interviews with people from the field, with vendors in the space today, talking about all of the latest product news, acquisitions, and funding announcements in enterprise security. That's with myself, John Strand, Adrian Sanabria, and Matt Alderman. And then, of course, we have Paul's Security Weekly, the flagship show where we dig into hacking matters, so to speak, every week with interviews, technical segments, and news. So many hosts on that show: Jeff Mann, Tyler Robinson, Lee Neely, Joff Thayer. I'm definitely missing people. Larry Pesci, of course. Doug White appears on that show for our regular host on Thursday evenings, which is fun because it happens kind of after the workday, so we feel it is the appropriate time to unwind and have more cigars and drinks. So you can subscribe to all of our shows by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe. That will allow you to subscribe to all of the shows individually, which is nice. There's also a consolidated feed with 4 or 5 of our shows in that rotation as well in one feed, or you can subscribe to each show individually in audio and video format, which is nice. You can join our Discord server. Many of you are probably in our Discord server today. We'll be hanging out there. I love Discord as a way to connect with the community. And, it's interesting when we look in the history of 15 years, we had IRC, we had Jabber, we've experimented with Slack, all kinds of different chat technologies. We've had forums. And Discord is a great platform to host those conversations today, and that's what we've standardized on to communicate both with each other and with our community and audience members, especially during the shows and during this live event. You can also subscribe to our mailing list to learn about things like this event, webcasts, virtual trainings, and all happening Security Weekly. You can do that all on securityweekly.com/subscribe. I want to talk a little bit about the Unlocked event today, and kind of, I'm going the wrong way on my slides too, by the way. I apologize. Let's move forward, talk about Security Weekly Unlocked. This was when we were doing the initial planning for this, decided it was going to be a free event for the community, with the community, because we're very focused, of course, on supporting our wonderful community. We wanted to have outstanding presentations from a diverse group of talent, and we put out the call for papers, and it was just a phenomenal, I couldn't ask for a better response. We had, I want to say 50 or 60 submissions, and we had to choose maybe a dozen. Were some of the numbers on that, and I would have had every talk. I thought all of the talks were outstanding, and I wanted to have all of them, but we could only have about a dozen or so. So those are talks you'll see today, and does represent a diverse group of talent and topics from our community and researchers today. We're going to discuss the 3 different tracks. Offense, defense, and security culture are the 3 tracks we decided on. It very much mirrors the way we've kind of done the anniversary shows in the past. We've, maybe had a series of roundtables or 3 roundtables. And when we divide it up into 3 different topics that we want to cover for a Security Weekly production, I think it's very fitting to talk about offense, defense, and security culture, as they are topics that we talk about across all of our shows in various capacities, and I think is really a nice representation of the topics that we talk about as hosts, that we bring on guests and others to talk about, along with talking with our audience about those very same topics. So I want to talk about the offensive track, and again, you can view the agenda. You can go to securityweekly.com/unlock to get the final version of the agenda, which will remain updated today as the event goes on. And the goals for the offensive track were really to understand new and innovative attacks and techniques. And that's really, I think, why we go to conferences, why we seek out people who are presenting in any different venue that are doing offensive research, and I mean that in the security aspect of hacking and offensive research, and are looking at breaking things, are looking at ways in which they can abuse technology or trick the system into gaining access to things they shouldn't have access to, essentially, with permission, of course. I think that brings a lot of insight, both if you're on a red team and doing offensive security tasks today, or if you're on the defender side. I think it's very important to understand what some of the new and innovative attacks are. I mean, heck, it's good to understand some of the older attacks because, quite frankly, understanding some of those older attacks allow you to understand some of the newer attacks. So we definitely want to keep a focus on the offensive side. Breaking stuff is still very fun and educational, and it doesn't matter if it's enterprise software or if it's an IoT device that you might find in the home. Those concepts and techniques can apply. Once you understand how things are broken, you can begin to understand how things can be built securely and how to defend things. So I think it's very important to understand things such as your Wi-Fi router, such as your drone, such as your refrigerator, whatever it is, your enterprise software. Understand how attackers are attacking those specific devices and software and systems gives you, I think, a much better perspective when you're looking at building something that you want to be more secure and or defending an architecture or an enterprise. Also, I think that when you look at newer innovative attacks, certainly when I read about a lot of the attacks that are being talked about and presented today, when we do Paul Security Weekly, for example, it allows you to consider attack paths that maybe you haven't considered before. And that's one reason why I like reading new research is I may apply that same technique to something different. And so I think it's interesting to look at how you can adjust the fan noises and LEDs on a computer to create a backdoor command and control channel that's off the record, so to speak. And that's interesting, but you may apply that to something else. So I think it's good to consider all of those attack paths and hear from those that have really dug into a topic and can really show you those attack paths and how they play out in different types of technology. Of course, humans will always be vulnerable and be part of applicable to security. And so those vulnerabilities we'll talk about in the context of social engineering, which is still very applicable today. Over to the defensive track, the ever-changing application security landscape is one thing. I mean, it's so deemed its own show, and it's just been amazing to look at the progression of application security, both how applications are developed today and how security plays a role or multiple roles in that process today has changed so much. And everyone's in a different state of their application software development lifecycle, their maturity level with developing applications and implementing security within their applications. And there are several talks focused on that today as well. We can't leave out MITRE ATT&CK because, everyone's talking about MITRE ATT&CK. MITRE ATT&CK is a great resource for understanding, again, those attack paths and how attackers will come after your network. Potentially, I think it gives us a common language and framework to have those discussions and has been very important to both offense and defensive teams today. In addition to the exercise of purple teaming, we'll talk about pen testing in one of our discussions on Paul Security Weekly later tonight. However, purple teaming is I think kind of lumped in there with a lot of newer techniques for adversary simulation and really working hand in hand to understand where your threats are, how they might play out on your network, and how you might defend against them. And working hand in hand between the blue team and the red team, I think, is super important. Another blue team tactic that I think is really, really important is deception. I think it's a very low false positive way that doesn't flood you with alerts. And not to say that alerting is necessarily bad, but deception gives you that opportunity to have those high fidelity alerts and can be very applicable to your defensive strategy today without carrying that moniker of, well, it's just a honeypot or a honey net. The technology and the techniques, I think, have advanced greatly. So the blue team is awesome. The blue team's where it's at. I think we need to talk more about defense in our industry. And that really comes down for me for my enchanting quadrants and network endpoint logs and threat intelligence. And, I like to make sure that our talk topics today touch on those, and they definitely will in various aspects, as well as incorporating application security. Strategy and culture is the final track. And this was the kind of everything else bucket, but I don't want to call it the everything else bucket because there's topics here that I believe we have to talk about today. That is, how do you get your start in information security? I wanted to have information for folks on career planning, on a career path. And I also want to talk about hacker culture, how to keep that hacker culture alive. And that plays out in many different ways. It can be protection for hackers that are doing security research in a positive light is always a theme that we want to hit on and make sure that we can still do security research safely. There's talks in here about changing the narrative. I think that's important because we can get stuck in a rut in cybersecurity. Maybe just by calling it cybersecurity, we can get stuck in old methodologies that don't necessarily apply to what's happening today. And I like talks and kind of movements that are looking to change the narrative, to update it to the challenges and techniques that we have today for protecting our enterprises and users. Also underscoring the importance of diversity in security today, which in all industries is important. I think especially important in security today because there's different perspectives that people will bring to the table, and often we have to do creative problem solving. Whether you're a defender, whether you're an attacker, whether you're doing compliance, whether you're in the C-suite, it doesn't matter. Creative problem solving is something very, very much at the roots of security and security programs today. The threats are constantly changing. The techniques for defense are constantly changing. Technology is constantly changing. So we have to be on our feet. And having that diverse team and people from diverse backgrounds will really help us keep up with that technology today. Again, whether you're on offense, defense, or application security, or whatever it is, all that stuff is changing rapidly. And we constantly need new and fresh perspectives. So again, make sure that you visit securityweekly.com/unlocked for the full agenda that is happening today. Again, there are 3 tracks. You can bounce around between those tracks today. The tracks from presenters are intermixed with some demos from our fabulous sponsors. All of those demos are guided by a Security Weekly host. We'll also be taking questions from the audience. So this is your time to ask the questions of the vendors. Ask them what you believe are the hard questions. That's why they're there, is to be able to do that demo and share and learn with the community, which is great. The presenters, the Security Weekly hosts, and the Security Weekly staff will be all in Discord throughout the day today, answering your questions, making sure that you get to where you need to go. And feel free to bounce around in the no one's saying you had to stay in one track for the entire day. Map it out, what talks you want to visit, and be able to kind of move through that throughout the day today, so that you're getting out of the event what you want to get out of the event. So make sure you spend some time reviewing that agenda and mapping out your plan. And then stay tuned, because right after the Security Weekly Unlocked event is Paul's Security Weekly, where we've got an offensive roundtable, defensive roundtable, and hacker culture roundtable. So now this year, remotely, we're bringing in all of our friends to have those important discussions around topics that are relevant today. Very much looking forward to that, as it is the 15-year anniversary of Security Weekly, and specifically, this show, Paul's Security Weekly, has been around for 15 years. So with that, everyone, enjoy the day today. I hope you get a lot out of the talks and discussions happening, and we'll see you at the wrap-up.